my club, the Club West Ham, is a great, great club. And what I would always say about them is that we were one of the first clubs in England to play 3 black players at the same time. Mm-hmm. It was Eddie Coker, Clive Charles, and myself. And funny enough, we all ended up playing in the NASL.
Indeed.
And we took it in our stride. We knew what to expect. And it's like when Eddie first played his game, I used to tell him, the way to silence the crowd is to put the ball into the back of the net. And if you do something brilliant and you put the ball in the back of the net, what could they say? They ain't going to say nothing to you, So that's what we try to do, and in lots of cases we did do that, And as I say, you got to be big, you got to be strong. If they get on top of you, they're winning, aren't they? So you just got to continue playing and doing what you can, because at the end of the day, the game has to be the winner.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hey, gang. Thanks for joining me. Tim Hanlon here. Indeed, this is Good Seats Still Available, that curious little podcast that's devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Can't thank you enough for giving us a listen. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a longtime listener, we welcome you as well. Today, we are spending some time on professional soccer in the United States with one of the more notable players from the 1970s and early 1980s across both the old North American Soccer League outdoor and indoor circuits, as well as the major indoor soccer league. His name is Clyde Best, and most people who are from England or followed British version of soccer in the late 60s and early 70s certainly know Clyde Best from his notable days at West Ham United. But in the 1975-ish era, came to the United States to play for a brand new team in the then fledgling North American Soccer League called the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and embarked from there on out into a quite notable career, scoring goals and winning over fans here in the United States, playing both outdoor and indoor soccer. Not only Tampa Bay Rowdies, but also the Portland Timbers for a bunch of years in the late 70s and early 80s. Outdoors with the Toronto Blizzard as well, but also a quick study in the indoor game, both the NASL flavors, that's the Tampa Bay Rowdies in 76, the Timbers played indoors in 80 and 81, the Blizzard played indoors in 81, 82, and then full-time for indoor soccer, which is a whole nother story, right? Because frankly, indoor soccer became the only soccer professionally really in the United States at that time, with the Cleveland Force and the Los Angeles Lazers, Mr. Best played with. And all of those interesting ports of call are on the docket for today's conversation with Clyde Best, who we talked to from the sunny shores of Bermuda, his native country. And boy, in this sort of up and down, cold and clammy spring here in Chicago, we certainly wouldn't mind a trade of locales for this conversation. However, we had to do it through the means of our communications equipment, and it is what it is. So what can we tell you? Clyde's autobiography is out. It's been out for about 6 months. It is called The Acid Test, the Autobiography of Clyde Best. It is available wherever good books are sold. You can go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com to grab a copy. You can also get an electronic copy via Amazon Kindle. It is published by DeCoubertine Books. I highly recommend the read, especially after you give a listen to our conversation with Clyde Best here on the program. The idea of our podcast is to explore some of the things in teams and leagues, especially in the United States, that are no longer with us. And certainly you've had some tremendous experiences here in the U.S. But before we even get to that, do you want to sort of give our listeners a bit of background, especially those in the United States who are more familiar with your career in the NASL and the MISL? We'll get to that, but you're obviously you obviously came out of Bermuda as, frankly, one of Bermuda's most lauded football stars, going to England first, correct?
Right. Yes. I left Bermuda when I was 17 and went over to England and had a trial with West Ham, and they liked what they saw, so they kept me, and I signed for them.
Well, you're being a little bit modest because you stayed there for quite some time, and obviously well regarded as one of the legacy players of that team.
Yes, yes, it was a good long time. It probably could have been a bit longer. It was lovely to play in the same team as the 3 World Cup players and play on a regular basis was great. We were a good team. We played good football, and we were brought up through the great Ron Greenwood, who wanted us to play attractive football, and that's what we try to do. When I look at the game today, I feel if it was back in our day, we probably could have won a league championship because, in those days, not many teams wanted to play the way we wanted to play,
Well, how did you get on the radar of West Ham in the first place? Because you're coming from a tiny country, not only geographically, but also in terms of world football, right? But players like yourself and the equally great Randy Horton, which is known to a number of our listeners as well. I mean, you two kind of broke the mold and kind of, I don't want to say escaped Bermuda, but made some real impact outside of Bermuda on the world stage. How did you get to West Ham?
Well, before us two, we had 1 or 2 people that had gone over before. A fellow named Junior Mallory, he played for Cardiff City. Bummy Simons played for Rochdale. Randy and I just picked the baton up and, carried it, for the length of time that we did. Randy was at the Cosmos. I was in England, and we had Carlton Pepperdeal, who played in Houston. We've had Johnny Newsom, who played in, I think it was Philadelphia. Pinks Lewis was in Philadelphia. Dale Russell was in Dallas. So, at that time, football in our country was at a very high standard, and we had very, very good players. But things have changed all of a sudden, and, we're not what we used to be. But hopefully we can get back there one day.
Well, certainly. So before we get into sort of your transfer, if you will, from West Ham to the United States, I do want to actually speak a bit to your early dalliances with the United States, because when you're with West Ham United, you actually kind of got your first taste of the United States and its, fragile, shall we say, relationship with soccer in 1969, playing in this championship cup with the old 5-team at the time, NASL. Do you remember your first impressions of that 5-team league and perhaps maybe even questioning whether soccer was even going to be a thing here in the United States?
Well, I've always felt that, soccer would do well in the United States, because when you look at the amount of people that have come from footballing countries that have been in the United States, and even though we weren't born there, we still had a passion for the game. And, a lot of these players, people like Puskás had been to the United States. As a matter of fact, when I was a young player in Bermuda, I was told that he wanted me to come play with his team, but through Phil Wooslam, who was the commissioner of the NASL in those days, and Ron Greenwood and our coach here, Graham Adams, they made it possible for me to go to England. But as I said, I've always had a strong feeling and a strong passion for football in the United States,
Well, okay, so but in 1969, you're with West Ham and you're playing here in the United States in the summer. You're essentially taking on the name of a team in Baltimore called the Bays, and you're basically asked to essentially, I guess, take on the persona of a team or a name, but basically it's the West Ham team playing in this little championship cup. Do you remember anything from those first games? I know you had an injury relatively early, but you did make some impression, no?
Yes, I remember. I think my first game was against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and I think we beat them 3-2 that night, if my mind is correct, and I think it is.
You are correct.
I think I ended up scoring 1 or 2 that night, and that was my first introduction to playing for the first team. What our coach used to do in those days, he used to, our players that he reckoned were going to be good enough, he would always take us on tour with the first team. And to be able to go to Baltimore and play in Baltimore was great, because I've always heard about it, and I'd heard about the Baltimore Bays, and it was nice to go there and, play against them in that city,
Well, it's interesting because based on my research, that game against Wolverhampton and was actually in the United States known as the Kansas City Spurs, right? But obviously it's Wolves versus West Ham. I think according to the records that I've seen, you had just barely over 5,000 people at that game.
Yes.
Anywhere else in the world, certainly England, but perhaps even elsewhere in the soccer knowledgeable world, you'd have in excess of 50,000 for that kind of game. So did you feel like something was a little bit amiss, or were you kind of like, no, this is maybe just a growing and early stage kind of thing in the United States?
Well, we knew it was going to be a growing concern, and it was something that was going to take time. Our main reason for coming was to come at the end of the season, and give the players some experience that don't play on a regular basis in the first team, and to play in this competition, and as I said, for me as a young person, it was great because I think we ended all the way going to LA and playing in Oakland, and I'm a baseball fan as well, so to play at some of those stadiums where the great baseball players played was unbelievable,
Well, so clearly it had some effect because you did clearly make the first team on a regular basis when you went back to the full West Ham season in '69 and '70.
No, go ahead. Yeah, he must have seen something from the tour that made him understand that I was ready, to go forward. As I tell people all the time, the most important thing for me is I always remember I went to West Ham at 17, and I think it was less than a year for me to get into the first team. So for me, that was unbelievable, and especially coming from a place like Bermuda, to be going playing on the big stage with all those players, and it was unbelievable,
Well, I think it's unbelievable for anybody, even in today's soccer world. So fast forward a year, in 1970, you were back in the United States, and perhaps with a bit more passion and fervor in the stands. Do you remember the game that you played against Santos and Pelé in September of '70?
Yes. I'll never forget that. Yeah.
All right. What do you remember?
Yes, I remember at the end of the game, Pelé scored 2 and I scored 2. And he was always the idol of mine, him and Eusebio. And to be playing against him for the first time, you're like a little kid, because you're playing against your idol. And what I really liked about him at the end of the game, he came up to me and he said, "I'm the king, you're the prince." And that was unbelievable, for him to say that. And whenever I played against him, I always made it a point of trying to score a goal, which I did every time we played, whether he was with the Cosmos or, when he was with Santos. And that night in particular was a great night because I think Santos were world champions. And, we were playing against them and some of the best players in the world at that time. The guys that were playing for Brazil, Carlos Alberto, Pelé, the little left winger, I forget his name right now, Edu. They were great players, so it was an honor and a pleasure to play against them.
Well, it must have been kind of a heady experience. I mean, here you are, I think you were, 19 years old during that game?
Yeah. Yes, it was, probably been 19, yeah.
And it was also...
as a soccer player or any professional player, once you're thrown in at the lion's den, you got to react. And if you don't react, you're not going to be there very, very long. It's like they say in the NFL, that stands not for long, if you don't perform. And soccer is no different, so you can't be afraid. You know, I tell people all the time, the bigger the crowd for me, the better it was, because I like to play in front of big crowds, because you want to show people what you're capable of doing.
Well, and that game, for those who have not done the research as we have here, it was a jam-packed Randall's Island, Downing Stadium in Randall's Island, just outside of New York, Manhattan, game. At over 22,000 for that game, and you recount it quite vividly in your book, which we'll talk about in a minute, as a steam bath, but it was also, frankly, it was a real almost 180-degree turn from playing in front of 5,000 people in a 50,000 seat stadium a year earlier. So perhaps there was something going on there, maybe that the United States was really taking to this, especially when you had two superb teams and superb players playing. And the U.S. crowds were appreciative.
As I said, with the population of foreign people and Brazilian people in New York, I mean, you mentioned Pelé's name. In those days, I mean, people are going to flock to the stadium. I mean, you had two of the best players in the world at that time playing at the same venue, and that was Bobby Moore and Pelé. And, you know, that was a easy ticket sale. You know, I mean, I remember we even had people like Telly Savalas, James Bond,
Roger Moore?
Gentleman. He was at
Sean
the
Connery.
Beg your pardon? No, not Roger Moore.
Sean Connery?
The first one, the Scotsman.
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery, he was there, you know, and he used to come to a lot of our games because him and Bobby Moore were good friends. So for people to come to that game that night, you know, it was like a big Broadway play, you know, and you had some of the best players in the world on the big stage, and I think we entertained New York pretty well that night.
I think so. I mean, based on my my research, there were not only 4 goals scored in the game. I mean, twice you had Pelé scoring in the first half, and you, in a span of 2 minutes, scored 2 goals to tie it up. So it must have been not a frenzied experience.
Yes, it was. It was. As I said, I remember the stadium being a small stadium that night. I think you said it was 20-something. It held 20-something, but I think they got a bit more in that night. Might have been close to 30. You know, it was packed to the rafters. You know, and it was great to be a part of it. You know, and as I said, when you ever mention that name, Pelé, it's an honor to be on the same pitch as him, you know.
Well, so obviously that, you know, you continue to do quite well on the first team with West Ham and for a number of years. Certainly your ups and downs as a player and some of the other issues that you had to deal with. But maybe we could sort of fast forward to 1975 when, you know, you've got the FA Cup with West Ham and you're essentially a reserve and maybe looking at sort of other things out there, including perhaps the United States again. But do you want to kind of tell us and I know you talk about this in the book, and I don't want to give all of it away, but do you kind of want to maybe recount to our listeners a little bit of what was sort of going on with you as a player and just as a person circa 1975, and perhaps why you would even consider leaving England for a place like the United States to continue to play?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, as a player, you want to be there in the big matches. And to miss out on an FA Cup, you know, that's a disappointment because, you know, that's what you play all your life for. And at that particular time, you know, I had played in the quarterfinals, but didn't play in the finals. I'm in the semifinals, and obviously, you know, there was no room for the final. It was between me and a good friend of mine, Patsy Allen. And funny, I set up the goal for Patsy in the semifinal, in the quarterfinal. So he's kept his place. And when it was time for me, you know, to get in, I wasn't able to get in. So, you know, obviously that didn't make me happy because I wanted to play, you know. And, you know, I had an agent in England at the time, the same gentleman that Bobby Moore had. And, you know, he had told me about the United States. And Eddie Fermani was a coach then. And, you know, he wanted to know if I wanted to come to America and, you know, just, you know, get fit and get ready to come back to England the next year, which I did. And, you know, I went over to Tampa And it was great. I mean, I fell in love with the place instantly, you know.
So this was basically set up originally as a loan for the summer in 1975
yes.
for you to come to Tampa Bay, not as a full transfer.
Yes. No, it was a loan at first. And as I said, Eddie Fomani was there. He took a bunch of us over, some good players from England. People like Paul Hammond, who was a goalkeeper at Crystal Palace, Mark Lindsay. Played Crystal Palace. Johnny Sissons played with me at West Ham. Johnny Boyle played at Chelsea. Derek Smithers was at Chelsea. So we had a pretty decent team, you know, and I said to myself, well, here's a new adventure. It's time, you know, it's an opportunity for me to go to America and help grow the sport there. And we ended up going to Tampa. And when we first started, it was like in Baltimore, not many people.
Right.
About the time we were ready to finish, we were getting like 55,000 people. So you say to yourself, hey, you know, something's happened here, you know, and we went on to win the championship that year. We beat the Portland Timbers in the final, and it was great, you know, it was a great atmosphere. The people were great, the club were great, the fans were unbelievable, you know, and you couldn't help but, you know, take that sort of stuff in, you know, and it was a marvelous time, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it because, as I said, a lot of people like myself, your Pelés, your Sabios, your Randy Hortons, you know, we know deep down inside, we hope to put American soccer where it is today.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, you scored, apparently you scored that second insurance goal of the Soccer Bowl in 75. And actually that was that final, I mean, talk about a magical season, right? That's Tampa Bay's first year in the league, right?
That's right.
Brand new stadium in Tampa, and you make it all the way to the final and win, and a national televised audience as well, which is rare or hadn't happened in a number of years in this country.
Oh yes, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was an unbelievable time. As I said, the people treated us like royalty. You know, anything we wanted, you know, was done for us. So you couldn't help but fall in love with the city and the place. And, you know, Tampa is still one of my favorite places today, you know, and it was just a great time. And as I said, all the players we had, you know, made it easy. And, you know, we were able to go on and reward the city with their first ever championship, you know, of any type.
All right. Well, so let's talk about some of the other reasons why you decided ultimately to leave permanently for Tampa Bay. I mean, anybody who's read your book, and obviously we want to make sure that we promote it. It's called The Acid Test: The Autobiography of Clyde Best, and it is available wherever good books are sold, and hopefully we'll get it maybe help promote it a little bit to get published here in the United States as well. But the acid test is only a play on words, but it's also it encapsulates some of the underlying issues that were frankly bedeviling you as a player in England, and maybe you want to sort of talk a bit about that, because it's a big issue that you know, in many respects still hasn't fully, you know, unwound itself from the pro game, unfortunately.
Well, the acid test comes from one day I was going through my fan mail, and someone decided to send me a hate mail that said that when I went onto the field, they were going to throw acid into my face. So when it was time to write the book, the ghostwriter got to me and said, hey, that's a great name. And we named it The Acid Test. But as I said, it was a funny thing to have had happen. And as I said, I think that particular game, I never stopped running. I must have run for 120 minutes, you know, because you didn't want to stand still in case something happened, you know. And I must, you know, I would always congratulate the club and the police, because they've done a fantastic job to protect me, to make sure nothing really happened, you know. And lucky enough, you know, it was okay. And, you know, I was able to get through it without any scrapes or anything like that, you know. But as, you know, being in England in those days, that was a part of the football, you know. People would do things to you to probably try to intimidate you and get you off your game. And my thing was always that I wasn't playing for myself. I was playing for all the people that were coming after me and the people that worked in the lower paying jobs and everything like that, to let them know that you can, get to the top if you put your heart and soul into it.
But that blatant, let's be honest, that blatant racism and situations as explicit as that had to unnerve you on some level. I mean, that can't not affect you in some way.
Well, I'll tell you what. My club, the Club West Ham, is a great, great club. And what I would always say about them is that we were one of the first clubs in England to play 3 black players at the same time. Mm-hmm. It was Eddie Coker, Clyde Charles, and myself. And funny enough, we all ended up playing in the NASL.
Indeed. And
we took it in our stride. We knew what to expect. And it's like when Eddie first played his game, I used to tell him, the way to silence the crowd is to put the ball into the back of the net. And if you do something brilliant and you put the ball in the back of the net, what could they say? They ain't going to say nothing to you, So that's what we try to do, and in lots of cases we did do that, And as I say, you got to be big, you got to be strong. If they get on top of you, they're winning, aren't they? So you just got to continue playing and doing what you can, because at the end of the day, the game has to be the winner.
Well, that's tremendous insight and wisdom, but again, I think it takes a brave and courageous soul to sort of approach it that way, because you can imagine we can all imagine how difficult and unnerving that kind of environment could be. But so, all right, when you get to Tampa, though, in the United States, it feels to me that the idea of sort of, the racial undertones and some of those difficulties were, I wouldn't say magically dissipated, but probably wasn't as pronounced perhaps maybe as it was in England when you were playing there.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I'm not going to say it didn't exist. If it did, it wasn't shown very much. And you had a job to do, and as I said, what happened in England, as I said, you had to be strong. Not anybody could do that. You have to be of a certain character. And as I said, the club were tremendous. Lots of times they never looked at what color you wear. They just wanted a good soccer player. And in most cases, that's what we turned out, And as I said, I had great teammates, and Bobby Moore used to talk to me all the time, Jeff, Billy Bonds, and these are the people that made sure you done what you had to do. And, you knew what you had to perform for, and the way you went about your job, made it a big difference,
Well, when you're in Tampa, you came back not to play outdoors to start, but you came to play this sort of odd little game called indoor soccer that you quickly excelled at as well. Do you want to kind of maybe talk about sort of your experiences playing on the indoor game in '76? Probably for the first time.
Well, in '76, Mark, Lindsay, and I, we decided Tampa is the place to go, because we were treated so well.
Sure.
The people in Tampa was great to us, and we said we're going to make the move, and I went in to see my manager. He went in to see his manager, and I told him that it was time to go to Tampa, because I liked it, and that's where I wanted to be, to try to make a difference. And as I said, playing indoor, if you can play the game of football, you can play anywhere. And the way we were brought up at West Ham, he always told us if we were in our living room and we had to move our furniture, you should be able to, play a game. And that's the way we went about doing our things. The game calls for good technique, you got to have a good touch, and you got to be willing to work. And if you have them three things indoor, most people can play, because it's all about ball control, being able to pass the ball. It's a small area, but a lot of the principles are the same. And I enjoy playing indoor. It was nice. in and out, a bit like hockey, and you done your job, and, you worked at it,
How quickly did you adapt to it? I guess pretty well, but I mean, look, in that period of time, it was.
It didn't take me. Yeah. It didn't take me any time at all. Huh. No time at all, because as I said, we played a lot of five-a-side in England. In the wintertime, lots of times when you can't get outside, you go to a gym and you play, three-a-side, five-a-side. It's the same thing, So that's what a lot of people don't understand. They seem to think that, indoor, is a big, big difference from outdoor. You still got to put your foot to ball, you know what I mean? And you got to control it, if you do those things, and indoor is a double. And
the rebounding and the plexiglass. Yeah. That didn't bother you?
You get used to all of that. It's lots of times it's just like playing a ball pass, with another person. If you know how to use the board, you get the ball back from the boards, and lots of times you end up scoring goals that way,
Well,
I must say it's a bit faster,
Well, you make it sound easy, but let the records show that not only were not only was Tampa Bay the champions of the indoor league that year, but you were also the MVP of the championship series, and you were the leading scorer. So you
yeah. Well, as I say, it comes from all your upbringing at a place like West Ham. We were known as a footballing club. We like to play football, and you want to hear the pat of the ball when you're passing it, pat, pat, pat. You don't want to see the ball going up 60 feet in the sky and can't get it. That's why we call it football. You put it down on the carpet and you play. And if you have good technique, that you can play the game anywhere if you have good technique.
All right, so later that summer, obviously you played back outdoors again with Tampa Bay, and some pretty amazing games with the Cosmos. You kind of touched on it a little earlier, but do you remember anything about the two games, both Tampa and in New York, against the Cosmos?
I remember the Tampa game because I think it was Giorgio Canelli's, Giorgio, Pelé, and Franz Beckenbauer's first game.
Correct.
And I think we played them on national television, and we gave them a good hiding. We beat them like 5-1.
That's right.
And it was an unbelievable game. I mean, it was national television. Rodney Marsh was here with us then. He was doing these tricks, and he was a dream player to play with, Rodney, because he made it so easy. And he had brilliant technique for a big fella. And he was sitting on the ball and all that. But what we forgot, that we had to go to New York the next Wednesday. And we were beating them 3-1 at halftime. I think I scored a hat trick.
You did?
Yes. And lo and behold, Pelé must have gone to the dressing room. I don't know what he told the Cosmos. But when they came out in the second half, it was a different bunch of guys. They ended up beating us 5-3. And it was an unbelievable game, and I'll never forget my friend Mark Lindsay. He picked up Pelé, and Pelé picked this ball up outside of their box. And he looks up in the field, and he sees Tony Field. Mm-hmm. And he hit this ball 40 yards over Tony Field's shoulder right into his path. And Tony continued to run down the wing. Pelé went right down the middle. Mark went with him. And he said, as he got outside the box, Pelé shouted, "Goal." And the ball came over, and he headed the ball in the net. And we couldn't believe it, but that's what playing against Pelé was like. Only he could do that sort of stuff, but it was a great competition, and it was always a great game when Tampa Bay played the Cosmos.
Did you guys remember the game only, 4 or 5 years earlier that you were playing against each other?
Well, we didn't know before, because when we came over, they weren't there, Pelé, Beckenbauer. I think after New York, after we Tampa started doing well, New York, got the people in that had the money, and they were able to bring the big stars over from Europe. I mean, when you look at the stars that the Cosmos had, most of them probably could have gone to Europe and continued to play. You had people like Beeskins, Rijsbergen, who I played with in Holland. You had Giorgio. You had Pelé, Carlos Alberto.
Sure.
I mean, they had unbelievable talent at New York. I think Dennis Tudor. You had the little boy Hunt who got into his groove, and so they were an unbelievable team, you know.
So you mentioned Rodney Marsh. There's a little bit of a hint in the book, and maybe we can address this once and for all. Were you responsible for bringing Rodney Marsh to Tampa Bay in the first place?
Yes, I was. I knew at the time I was in England, Rodney was at Manchester City, and I knew he was on his way out of City. So I phoned my people in Tampa and told them, look, let's get this guy. He can play. Come and get him. So one of our general manager at the time was a guy called Bo Rogers. Mm-hmm. And Bo came over, and we watched him play the game in Crystal Palace one night. And him and I went, and we saw him. Bo liked him, and he took him there and then, made arrangements for him to come over to America. Mm-hmm.
And he's still there, from what I understand. I hear him every day on
Sirius
XM.
Yeah, he loves it. Last time I spoke to him, he was there still, and he loves it there. You know, I think his children might have gone back to England, but him and his wife, you know, they love it, yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, a lot of the guys that we played with in Tampa are still there. You know, they liked it, fell in love with it, and ended up staying.
Yeah, Rodney hosts a show, a thrice weekly show called Grumpy Pundits here in the United States on Sirius XM satellite, and it's great to hear him sort of regale not only in today's stories but the stories in the past. All right, so
right.
So Tampa was a wonderful experience, but yet you wound up in Portland by way of a Dutch team. You want to maybe walk us through a little bit of that and your experiences in Portland as well?
I went to Portland first, because Brian Tyler, who was the manager then, he liked the way Stewart and I played, Scullion.
Sure.
So he came in and got Stewart and I, and Eddie, you know, up until now they tell me he's really realized that he made a big mistake by letting us go. But Brian came in and he let us go to Tampa, and we ended up in the Northwest, and ended up falling in love with Tampa, you know, Portland,
from
in the Northwest.
One extreme to the other, right?
City. Yep. What's that?
One extreme to the other, weather-wise, right?
Yes. But it was a great city. I think it's probably one of the best places in America if you want to raise a family and stuff like that. You know, it was a great city, great people. We met lots of friends who we're still friends with today, and you know, it's something and a place that we'll never forget, you know.
Have you been keeping tabs on the current iteration of the Portland Timbers franchise? It seems like they've really embraced.
I watch them now. I try to watch them now and again. You know, I haven't. You know, I see they won a championship a few years ago, or 2 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah, and it's, you know, it was nice to see them win, because Portland is a footballing city. They're crazy there about the football, and apparently they still are today. So it's nice to see the franchise still doing well. I just wish Tampa can pick up a little bit and get up where Portland is, you know.
Well, Major League Soccer certainly has thrown down the gauntlet for expansion and the rules by which they're going to bring teams back in. And obviously Tampa had its opportunity in the early part of MLS, but perhaps the Rowdies franchise in USL now can rise up and get its stadium situation all together and potentially get back into MLS. It would be interesting to see.
Yeah, it would be interesting because it's a great footballing city, and the people there, you know, will support. You know, it's been proven that they can do it, and I'm sure they still have a large fan base, you know, in Tampa at the present time, you know.
So, aside from your NASL exploits, I think one of the areas that is really not really talked about much in your career is your extensive indoor career, especially with teams in the major indoor soccer league. You want to give our audience a bit of a sense of how you started to play more regularly and then full time as an indoor player versus staying either in the NASL here in the United States?
Well, my first indoor venture was in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
And once I went to Tampa Bay, I went to Portland. And a good friend of mine, Adam Hudson, who was playing in Seattle at the time, had given me a call and said Eddie McCready is in Cleveland, and he was looking for players, so he was going to tell him about me. And I had played against Eddie at Chelsea, when I was young, and
Sure.
Alan, and they knew what my capabilities were like. So I ended up going to Cleveland for a few months before the NASL season started back in Portland. So I went to Cleveland, and, it was nice. Eddie was brilliant, great guy. And we went there, but I had to go back to Portland to get ready for the start of the season. But my time in Cleveland was great, and Eddie is a person that I admire and will always. He was a great coach, and, he was a great person to play for and against,
Do you still have any of those Cleveland Force uniforms? They were probably the most colorful and garish uniforms in the MISL.
No, I don't have any. Those really white and different colors,
Yeah,
and then we had a black one, if I remember.
Yeah, I think there was also yellow and blue, and if people look online, there's this logo of a person with sort of the Force. I guess it was influenced by the Star Wars movie franchise.
Is that right?
But they took.
I don't know. Was a gentleman named Bart Weinstein and his son Scott that owned the team in those days, and they were great people, So, if they're still going along, if they're listening, hey, thanks a lot for those wonderful times,
Okay, so how did you talk to me about your MISL exploits in Los Angeles then, right? Because that was really kind of the last playing that you did in the United States, but the LA Lazers were probably a little less well supported maybe than even Cleveland was indoors.
No, well, I got in LA through Peter Wall, who used to coach at California Surf.
Yes.
He played at Crystal Palace. So my friend Clyde Charles, knew about them playing in the Forum and at the Lazers, and it was owned by Jerry Buss's children at the time. I think John and a friend of his owned the team. So Peter gave me a call and wanted to know if I wanted to come to L.A. Now I had a choice between L.A. and Toronto. Well, Toronto was so cold in the winter, that was a no-brainer, So because I was tired of being in the cold in Toronto, so I went from Toronto to L.A. once Peter, came in for me.
And do you remember anything about your the games at the LA Forum? Not well attended, if I remember correctly, but a good 3 years of playing, right?
At times we got pretty good crowds, as the team started to win. I would say at times we got like 18,000, 20,000 people, once we started to do good, because LA is a city of champions, and you just can't throw anything in LA because the people are used to winning, and it would have been nice if team could have done better, but a lot of times it depends on the quality of players that you have. They will determine that, if we had a guy like Stankovic or the one that used to play for the team in New York or Zongo, probably would have been a different thing,
So, since you had extensive experience playing both brands of indoor soccer in the U.S., any remembrances of sort of the difference in play between the NASL and the MISL, besides the color of the ball?
Not really. I mean, it was basically the same. Hey, put your foot on the ball, control it, make a nice pass to your opponent. The rules are practically the same. When you had a fast break, a bit like hockey, you took advantage of it. If you got numbers up like 3-on-1 or 3-on-2, you try to take advantage of it. So it was basically the same in the NASL as in the MLS. I just think the MLS played a bit longer, and I think they're still playing today. Am I correct? The MLS?
MLS, of course.
Yes, they're still going now. So, You know, they've been there for a long, long time. So for them, you know, it's a lot easier. But I think, as I said previously, if you can play the game of football, you can play anywhere if you got the right credentials.
Well, your experiences in the U.S., I mean, you played for a number of teams, both outdoor and indoor, and obviously adapted very well to the American culture and lifestyle. Did you ever wonder during the 70s and 80s? I mean, look, you were playing for different teams, not all of them stable or lived on after you left them. Did you ever worry about sort of how rooted, substantially rooted the game was going to be? And did you ever worry about the league or the teams that you were playing with not being around or not lasting a long period of time?
Not really, because I've always felt that if we get to the kids and we coach the kids properly, those are going to be the ones that are going to take it to the next step, you know, and that has happened. I mean, once I finished playing, I went to coach in high school, you know, and from high school I went to a junior college, and a lot of my boys ended up playing competitive in the leagues, you know. One of them played for the U.S., little Joe Maxmore.
Sure.
You know, so these players have, you know, continued the process, you know, because what I try and tell young players all the time, the game is going to be here longer than all of us. So let's try to leave our mark somewhere, you know, and that's what life's all about, you know, because nothing's forever, especially in professional sports. You could be here today and gone tomorrow. So you have to try and make your mark where you can. And that's what life's all about. So, you know, I'm grateful for having the opportunity to come to Bermuda, come to the U.S. and give something to them. And as I said, I think we've done a pretty good job.
Well, I think you're being modest. And, you know, I think, you know, it's clear.
Well, that's just the way I am, you know. To me, when you achieve things, anybody that goes off and totes his mouth off, he's got something wrong with him. You know, once you've done what you have to do, you don't have to do that sort of stuff, you know.
Well,
and this is the way I am, you know, laid back, reserved, and you let a lot of people read up and look and see what you've done, and, you know, you try and let them make that assessment, you know. I know deep down inside I've done the best I could, and, you know, that's what life's all about.
Well, I do think it's a testament to players like yourself who, you know, truly were pioneers in this country in particular, right, in the 70s and early 80s.
Right.
In that, you know, you have a very successful and stable Major League Soccer now. You have two divisions of minor league soccer underneath MLS. And you also have now teams that have reignited the original names from two of the franchises that you played for.
Well, I'm glad for that. Yeah, I'm glad for that. You know, I'm glad we still have the Portland Timbers, and I'm glad we still have the Rowdies. You know, that's a good sign because that tells you the longevity of the football in the United States, you know, and I just hope it continues to grow. And as I said, we keep working on the children and making sure they become educated and make sure they're coached in the right manner so it can get better. I would like to, before I close my eyes, to see them win a World Cup. It could happen. You don't know, you know.
Well, there are a lot of people in this country who've been kind of long suffering and waiting for that to happen, and seems to be some fits and starts. But, you know, I think you're right. I mean, look, the idea that team names from 20, 30, 40 years ago are being resurrected and used and as real roots and real history, you know, in a country that is historically not a soccer nation, although, you know, historians will say that it's been played for many, many, many years. But on a grand scale, it hasn't. And that's a testament to players like you breaking the mold and making things happen in this country when it wasn't necessarily so guaranteed or so sure.
Well, I'm glad we had the opportunity to do it. And as I said, I've always been a person that if I'm going to go somewhere to make a difference, I'm glad to be a part of it. And that's what we were during those years in the NASL, you know, to help something grow and something to get better. And as I said, my most important thing, most of the kids that I have They've all been to college. They've all got educated. And when I see stuff like that happen, that makes me happy,
Well, it would make me happy if Toronto FC, if the Tampa Bay Rowdies or the Portland Timbers would bring back Mr. Best for any and all reunion games, and perhaps some remembrances of his tremendous playing careers in each of those places. So there's the open invitation.
I wouldn't have a problem going to that. That's something they would have to decide to do. As I said, I speak to my friend Mark Lindsay, quite often. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping to try and bring him on for a golf tournament that I have in Bermuda with my foundation for kids' education. So, if they decide, I would greatly be appreciative and, would follow through and come to whatever they would like to put on.
I think it would be great. And there's a whole bunch of players that I'm sure people who think that soccer was created in their lifetimes would recognize that there was actually a history prior to that. Clyde Best, I thank you so much for being part of our show, and hopefully a little bit of promotion for the book, and hopefully we'll see you at a soccer stadium here in the United States soon to remember some of your great work on the field and off in the United States.
Thanks very much, and tell them don't give up on the USA. We're going to get there one day.
Thank you, Clyde. We love that. Awesome. Take care.
Okay. Nice talking to you.
You
Bye-bye.
as well. Thanks, Clyde. Bye-bye. Okay, there you have it. There's our chat with Clyde Best, who we thank for joining us from the sunny shores of his home in Bermuda. And I think it's important to remember that, Clyde Best, along with Randy Horton and maybe one other, is probably the best soccer player to ever come out of Bermuda, and is obviously revered there as one of its greatest soccer exports. And no doubt, at age 17, playing for First Division West Ham in arguably the best league in the world at the time in England is certainly indicative of how good he was, certainly in his early years, and of course in a quite successful career in West Ham, and then at a still fairly young age, I think in his sort of not even mid-20s, coming over to the United States and the greener pastures of the fledgling North American Soccer League and the game professionally here in the States. So some great stories, and I did not know, as I tend to learn something in every episode at least, that Clyde was responsible, at least so he says, for bringing Rodney Marsh, or getting Rodney Marsh to the Tampa Bay Rowdies here in the States. And we've got to get Rodney on a future episode to corroborate that story, of course, and regale us further with some old Tampa Bay Rowdies memories. So again, Clyde Best, thank you for joining us. Clyde's book is The Acid Test, the Autobiography of Clyde Best. It is published by D. Cupertine, I believe it's how you pronounce it, he says, hopefully, books. It is out and available now. I know it's been published in the UK. It may soon come to the United States, but you can still order it regardless wherever fine books are sold, or you can go, of course, to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You will find a link to the book, as well as the Kindle digital edition there, as well as, of course, old episodes of our show and all kinds of other good stuff about how to get in contact with us, our email address, our email newsletter, as well as, of course, all of our social media feeds, which we encourage you to sign up for at least one of, so you can keep in touch with us and even communicate with us when it's warranted. And, of course, on Twitter, that's at Good Seats Still. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. And you'll find us on Facebook. We got a page for this show there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got plenty more of great episodes to come, lots of great conversations in the hopper. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll get our first in-person interview. A lot of those coming up, and just fun stuff coming up. And please, indeed, send us your cards and letters and suggestions. We love hearing from our fans, and we appreciate you listening. Until then, take care, and we'll see you soon.